1, 2, 3, 4, is that it?
That works.
I guess so.
However y'all want to do it. Sure. I know it's a really large crowd, but feel free to come on up if you want. There's plenty of seats up here in the front. We'll start in a couple minutes. We'll start at 20 after. I know it says 15, but we'll do 20 after.
I thought I would sit here.
Okay.
I think, aren't you before?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Maybe it makes sense to go in order, so.
What you did, thank you.
Looks everyone's comfortable and set, so we might as well begin. I just want to welcome everyone to this panel today. This is Faith-Based Perspectives on Respect for Creation. I'll just open the panel up with a little bit of a personal experience of my connection to this topic. Growing up, I grew up in a Greek, Italian, American family. And so on both sides, I learned from my grandparents and great-grandparents this idea of respect for creation. On my Greek side especially, we had in a suburb home, we're not talking about a farm, we're talking about a suburb home, my grandfather grew all of his fruits and vegetables in the backyard, had chickens, rabbits, and all these types of things. So growing up, we would go in the backyard with him and he would teach us how to tend the soil and all of those types of things. And so I grew up knowing how and knowing the process of care for creation. But there was something that I got a little bit later in life, and that had to do with the faith aspect. After some of my studies, I had moved to Turkey to work at the Ecumenical Patriarchates. Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, for those who don't know, is considered the Green Patriarch. He's done many symposia to save water sources, and then he's worked on climate change and a variety of other issues that's gotten him named the Green Patriarch. So working there with him and with his advisor on this matter, Father John Chrysavgis, who spoke at the plenary yesterday, I began to learn about the faith perspective and learn that there's this relationship, starting from the Christian perspective, from Genesis 1, when you have the creation of the earth, and the humanity is called to be a steward of creation, all the way through to the many instances throughout the Gospels and the teachings through the New Testament, that there's this component that's not just you do it because you know how to till the soil and you're amazed that a little seed can turn into a huge plant and feed you and all these types of things, but you do it because you actually have a relationship and there's a connection between the two. And that connection is summed up in the Ecumenical Patriarch's quote that I'll read now. If human beings were to treat one another's personal property the way that they treat the natural environment, we would view that behavior as antisocial and illegal. We would expect legal sanctions and even compensation. When will we learn that to commit a crime against the natural world is also a sin? So to think of from something as small as a single-celled organism to the intelligent being of a human, we're all connected in the same way. We should have the same level of respect that we have for a human as we do to a single-celled organism, and even not just single-celled organisms, but the dirt and the other things that allow for that, water and everything that allows for life to grow. So the point being here is just that each and every different faith tradition is going to bring something more to the conversation. You know, for my tradition, it's this idea of relationship, this connectivity between us and creation, as being part of creation rather than set apart from it. And so that's sort of the precipice behind this panel today and the idea of looking at the different faith-based perspectives on respect for creation. Now I'll introduce our first panelist. Reverend Douglas Sauer was born and raised in the Midwest, USA. He made profession in the Discalced Carmelite Order in 1986 and was ordained in 1992. He studied in Spain, then returned to the province to live and work in many locations and ministries. Presently, he helps the secular order members and communities of the province with their formation, assists their communications director with the website, and represents the province on the board of the Carmelite Institute of North America. He lives at the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Little Flower, St. Teresa, and in San Antonio, where he also assists with sacramental ministry. So, Reverend Douglas, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. I'm here, of course, representing the Roman Catholic perspective on this, but in a more personal way, specifically the discuss Carmelite, or you might say the Roman Catholic contemplative spiritual tradition on this question of respect for creation. I suppose I'm also here to be a little bit, to start out on a gloomier note. I'm not the most optimistic in some of these matters about humanity's capacity to significantly change its orientations. So that the hopefulness can come from the other panelists. I know we need to maintain a spirit of hope. Okay, let me stick to my text here. Christianity is the religion of empire. It also founded in itself to justify a particularly savage and dehumanizing form of slavery. It is the religion within which capitalism arose and flourished, along with colonialism, all in my book expressions of our sinful human capacity to dominate and exploit. But Christianity is also a religion of great selflessness, as witnessed to by persons like St. Francis, St. Vincent de Paul, St. Elizabeth of Hungary, the martyrs of Compiègne, not to mention Théodore de Chardin, Dorothy Day, Martin Luther King, Daniel Berrigan, among many others, in our day. It is a religion of great art, liturgy, profound mystical experience, and a strong sense of the sacramental character of creation. Christianity is, in a word, incarnational. It is not a flight from the world, but an immersion in it. That's where the path of salvation lies, here in this world. So which is the bug and which is the feature when it comes to Christianity? I don't know. Christianity lifts up as Lord and Savior someone who taught nonviolence, equality of all before God our Father, and the coming of a kingdom of God, a kingdom we can even now be part of through works of peace, forgiveness, compassion, and self-giving love. Moreover, Christianity takes as its saving event the arrest, torture, and execution of this teacher, Jesus of Nazareth. A display of divine saving power manifest paradoxically in the utter helplessness, degradation, nakedness, and abandonment of its Savior. Yet, in the 2,000 years since that event, the Church has managed to turn the crucifixion, which is an execution, into a pietistic and cultic ritual, isolating Jesus' death from the life that preceded it. It has likewise often chosen religiosity over fidelity to the Lord's teachings, supplanting them with doctrines and dogmas and devotions. It has raised up and sustained a community of faith, the Church, by instituting hierarchies of order, an institution which I dare say has too often forsaken God's kingdom for that of Caesar. Well, it's never too late for Christianity to try to redeem itself, and articulating, then living out a very clear and unambiguous respect for creation. Let me say that again. A very clear, unambiguous respect for creation is, I think, one good way for Christianity to pursue such a path of renewal today. Of course, humanity as a whole, and especially the developed nations, must make some such redemptive reorientation towards creation if we are to save not just Christianity, but our species and our planet. But I'm sorry to say about that reorientation ever happening within the ever-shrinking window of opportunity we have before us. About that, I'm pretty pessimistic. In fact, I've become recently rather apocalyptic about it, to use a religiously weighted term. By apocalyptic, I mean the view of the future that sees human sin, social, political, economic sin, as well as personal sin, as sadly victorious and decisive within human history. Thus, this view hopes and prays that God will somehow intervene in order to accomplish his promised regeneration, or recreation of the world, moved by his mercy and faithfulness. In the meantime, I think of the Christianity of the future as having a twofold task. First, it will need to work to strengthen our human capacity for respect of others in the fullest moral and spiritual sense of the word, so that the looming social and environmental crises before us don't tear us apart. In a word, it will have to give spiritual witness to our human interconnectedness and interdependence, so as to ward off fascist tendencies and tribalism. Second, it will need to help direct that respect for others towards the non-human world, towards nature, its equilibria, its harmonies, its rhythms and processes. It will have to give to the work of helping to rebuild creation rather than exploit it the full weight of moral obligation. Speaking as a Roman Catholic, the Church, in its teaching authority, has already begun laying the foundation for this work of truly respecting creation. Most notably in the encyclical Laudato Si on Care for Our Common Home, issued in 2015 by Pope Francis, we find some initial yet authoritative teachings. Many consider this encyclical the most important document to emerge from the Holy See in our lifetime, if not longer. The document employs science, social and economic analysis, moral considerations, and spirituality. It is a profound document which, perhaps for the first time, in a clear and forceful way, expands Christian Catholic social teaching on mutual responsibility between persons and peoples, what one might call moral and spiritual respect for all others, to now embrace our common home, this home of all living beings, our planet. Thus, it expands with moral and spiritual clarity for Catholics and absolute respect for all creation. A concept central to this teaching found in Laudato Si is, in the phrase employed by the Pope, an integral ecology. It is a rich concept with layers of meaning and application. One would expect as much from the presence of the adjective integral. The idea is that of a kind of all-embracing human ecology. That is, a taking care of our existential environment that strives to be integral or integrative in scope, embracing our humanity in all its aspects as an existence profoundly and interdependently one with its environment. Here's a quote showing how the Pope uses this phrase in terms of spirituality, or our spiritual character is as human persons. An integral ecology includes taking time to recover a serene harmony with creation, reflecting on our lifestyle and our ideals, and contemplating the Creator who lives among us and surrounds us, whose presence must not be contrived, but found, uncovered. We are speaking of an attitude of heart, one which approaches life with serene attentiveness, which is capable of being fully present to someone without thinking of what comes next, which accepts each moment as a gift from God to be lived to the full. This passage comes late in the document where the Pope turns to questions of spirituality, that is, to specific spiritual characteristics of being in this world, and of relating to others, oneself, the events of one's life, the transcendent, the divine. I would suggest that the spirituality described here in the quote above, this spirituality of an integral ecology, is without doubt the style or way of being, the inner attitudes and orientations, the personality of a contemplative person. Carmelite life and spirituality, Carmelite being the religious family to which I belong, just as one might belong to the Jesuits or Franciscans or Benedictines, is primarily the spirituality of a Christian life shaped by the regular practice of interior prayer and recollection. This practice in turn disposes and prepares us for contemplation, that direct, personal, transforming experience of the divine, of that transcendent love we Christians call God. This meaning of the word contemplation for Carmelites is a little different than it is in other spiritualities, such as Benedictines or Franciscans, for example. Thus, the work of specifically this religious family to which I belong is very much dedicated to acquiring for oneself and helping others acquire something of the attributes of a contemplative person, as described by the Pope in the passage quoted above. And what is crucial today, our mission is to acquire and teach these characteristics in our modern capitalistic social order and urban culture. To do so represents, I would say, a kind of spiritual breakthrough, redeeming Christian history in some small measure by witnessing to a radically different social order, one more humanely in harmony with itself and its environment, namely with God's creation. It shows us what it can mean to truly respect creation and so be part of that divine recreation, even now at work among us, namely the coming of the kingdom of God. Alas, such a contemplative witness won't change anything on a large scale, but the task for such a faith-based tradition as Carmelite spirituality is to give that witness nonetheless. We are writing amid the history of human sin, the history of a spiritual resistance. Whatever the future holds, that prophetic mission surely counts for something. Thank you.
I'm very short. Thank you, Reverend Douglas, for giving us that beautiful talk. You started out saying it was going to be very bleak, but you left us on a high point of hope, saying
Okay.
that we have potential for a reordering of the social order that is inclusive of creation. Our next speaker is Temton Mirza. He's a Mobed, a Zoroastrian priest, and volunteers religious and spiritual services to Zoroastrians in southwestern Ontario and Michigan. He's a CPA by profession, a marathoner, and a recreational pilot. Temton has published articles on Zoroastrianism in various North American publications and spoke on Zoroastrian topics throughout North America. He currently serves as vice president of the North American Mobeds Council. Temton, you're on. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I am talking from Zoroastrian perspective. So, as we know, Zoroastrianism was preached some 5,000 years ago. We are not sure exactly when, but most of the scholars agree that it was about 5,000 years ago. Yet, Zoroastrianism is believed to be the first green religion. Many scholars have concluded that Zoroastrianism, preached 5,000 years ago, was the first green religion. Nature is at its core in the practice of Zoroastrianism. This is evident in Zoroastrian festivals and Zoroastrian ceremonies. The important Zoroastrian annual festivals are in celebration of nature. From celebration of our new year, Nowruz, as nature rejuvenates in spring, so do we count that as the new year. We have water festival in summer. At the start of summer, we have Maragan, the fall festival for harvest. Midwinter, we have fire festival. So Zoroastrian festivals are in recognition and celebration of nature and change in nature. So all Zoroastrian rituals and ceremonies involve representation from nature, from God's creations, from fire, water, animals, earth, vegetation, humans. Any ceremony that you have a factor of these God's creations in it. It instructs its followers to observe and practice a lifestyle that is non-polluting, ecologically friendly, and environmentally conscious. Though one of the oldest known religions, the Zoroastrian teachings and practices are most modern as they relate to ecology and environment. Reverence and worship to the nature's elements is the basis of Zoroastrianism. So fire, air, water, earth, vegetation, animals are the utmost important in Zoroastrian teachings and its practices. Lord Ahura Mazda, the Lord of wisdom, and his bounteous immortals, the Amishasmans, oversee the 7 creations. Humankind, being the conscious creation, is assigned the responsibility I underline and emphasize responsibility of caring for the universe. So Zoroastrianism promotes virtues that are essential to tackle the present-day environmental issues. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what I said to you up to now is not new. I'm sure you must have gone to different seminars till now, and just about everywhere, just about every faith said the same thing. There is no faith that I know of that would say anything otherwise. Every faith says that yes, environment is important, and yes, we should respect it. And yes, God's creations are very important to us. So what I'm going to say now forwards is what is more important. So at the gathering of a prestigious organization, Parliament of World's Religions, it must be acknowledged and recognized that for the world religions to remain relevant, they must play a defining role in inspiring individuals and societies to take action to address the causes of climate change and to lead them in this endeavor. We have to be relevant. If we don't do it, we will lose the relevance, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, as representatives of our respective religions, it is our ethical and moral responsibility to do so. World's religions, moral authority, and institutional power are the attributes that most likely will affect change in human attitudes and practices and public policies. To take a position that God will somehow intervene and miraculously fix the problems that we have, ladies and gentlemen, I have news for you. That's not going to happen. God has given us the mind to think about things. He has given us the tools to fix this problem. It's up to us to do something about it. If we don't do it, we have failed God. So the Mother Earth has sustained us all, regardless of our religious beliefs, our faith, or lack thereof. So it's our duty and responsibility to respect and protect Mother Earth, regardless of our faith, our religion, or lack thereof. So it is not difficult to identify numerous examples throughout history on how religions have inspired communities and countries to rise up against injustice and other problems faced by humanity. Throughout history, religions have inspired ambition and strengthened the will and determination of its people to achieve a just and compassionate society. It has done it in the past. Now the same powerful force on this earth, world's religions, is challenged to unleash its most transformative force on humans' disregard for God's creations. It's our job to do something. And as world religions, we have indeed directed our attention to this cause. Our academics have studied these issues. Our theologians have identified scriptural references that identify and encourage us to act. Our respective spiritual leaders have spoken and have stressed the importance of ecological consciousness. Yet, regretfully, the world as a whole is lagging behind in its respect for God's creations. What we have done thus far is not enough. Let us ask ourselves, do we want to live in a country on the earth that respects God's creations or not? Do we want to leave behind this earth as we pass on which God's creations can live comfortably the way we know them right now? It's our choice. If the answer is that we don't care, we are going to live the way we are, well, then we continue living the way we are. But if the answer is that yes, we want to make sure that God's creations, the way they were given to us, are left behind on this earth as we go on and move on, then we need to act. We must act, as the consequence of inaction are dire. Let us ask some difficult questions, some uncomfortable questions, some pointed questions. Let us challenge our thinking. Let us challenge our practices. Are they in compliance with the ecological issues of today? We have the same mother, Mother Earth. Our mother is in need. Our mother is crying out. We have to respond, ladies and gentlemen. So the clock is ticking. Let us challenge ourselves and get involved. Let us put God's creations ahead of everything else. Let us change our lifestyle to preserve our common house, our common home, the earth. For that is our duty to our Almighty. Thank you.
Thank you, Tempton, for that, beautiful presentation. It was good to learn about nature being at the core of Zoroastrianism, and that it has a call to fix the problems that we have created or that we are a part of, and to think ahead to what we're leaving behind us. Our third speaker is Gopal Patel. He serves as director of the Bhumi Project, an international environmental initiative that is based at the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies and works in partnership with the US-based nonprofit Green Faith. He has led campaigns to green temples in India, conducted international trainings on climate change, and helped draft the 2015 Hindu Declaration on Climate Change. He serves as an advisor to the Climate Action Task Force of the Parliament of World Religions and on the Advisory Council of the United Nations Religion and Development Task Force. He is based in New York City. Gopal, you're on.
Good morning, everyone. I had a talk prepared, but it's kind of the same talk I've been giving over the last 3 days in the different sessions, so I thought I'd try something new today, so bear with me. Hinduism starts with a question, and that question is, who am I? Who am I? And it's the pursuit of truth, of understanding that fundamental question, who am I as a human being? And through this one question, that seed, the whole of Hindu thought develops. Hinduism then explores, if I need to know who I am, I need to understand what the world is. But if I need to understand the world, I need to understand who or what God is. So it's an exploration of these various questions. And that's what I want to really focus on. What are we? Who are we? And how that can help us address the climate crisis that we're facing. When Hinduism starts exploring these questions of who we are, it identifies a number of what it considers universal truths that permeate the universe, and which offers guidance in terms of how humans should act in the world. The first one is that of Dharma. Dharma, which means that which upholds or sustains the natural order of the world. People have heard of this word, Dharma, before? But before the word Dharma, the very first principle that Hinduism teaches in the Rig Veda, which is the first of the Vedic texts, it talks about a concept called Rita, spelled R-T-A, Rita. It means universal order or balance. The very first teaching in Hinduism says that there is a universal order or balance in the universe. And therefore, individuals have to live a life of Dharma, one of upholding and sustaining that natural order and the natural balance of the universe. And when one leads a life that is not aligned to Dharma, which is not aligned to upholding and sustaining the natural order of the cosmos, you find chaos and destruction and imbalance in the world. Now, to complement these two principles of Rita and Dharma, it then explores further and says, okay, well, how do you uphold an order or a natural balance? How do you maintain and sustain something? So then it talks about ahimsa, It talks about living a life of non-violence or the minimization of violence. You cannot maintain something if you're causing violence to it. So it says that we should minimize our violence to ourselves, to other people, and to the world at large. And then it recognizes that the human, the self, has unlimited desires, right? How many desires do we go through on a minute-by-minute basis? Unlimited, right? And the mind is going 1,000,000 miles an hour. Can you imagine if we had a sign on our forehead that showed every single thought that was going through our head at any moment, or any single desire that we had? Hinduism recognizes that we have unlimited desires, and these unlimited desires are dangerous to upholding the natural order and the natural balance. So therefore, in the Isha Upanishad, which is the first of the Upanishadic texts, the very first verse talks about understanding that we need to have self-restraint in order to sustain the world. This year we're celebrating the 150th birthday of Mahatma Gandhi, and one of his most famous quotes or lines is that there is enough for everyone's need, but not for one man's greed. And that teaching he has, or that he taught, was taken out of this Isha Upanishad. This is called the Isha Vashya principle, that we have a quota in this world that has been given to us by God. And to maintain that quota, we need to have a level of self-restraint, or in Sanskrit, the word is tapas or tapasya. And if we encroach on the quotas of others, then we're going to cause disharmony and disbalance, because then that person suffers, right? So in order to stay within our quota, we have to have an understanding that our desires are unlimited, and we need to rein in our desires in order to maintain harmony and balance within the world. Is this kind of making some sense? A little bit. But what relevance does this have now when we're living in an age of the Anthropocene, an age where the climate, the natural environment of the world is because of human activity, where we are affecting the seasons and the oceans and the food that we eat and the rains. We are responsible for the environment in which we live in now, the first time that's ever happened in human history. Throughout human development, we've shifted our relationship with nature. In earlier times, nature was a wild place that we wouldn't go into, right? There was places of the world where that's wild, wilderness, we can't touch that, right? There's periods of human history where we've romanticized the natural world. But from the 1800s, we shifted and we decided to tame and control the natural world and become masters of the natural world. And that thinking of domination has led us to the world we're in right now, of the Anthropocene, of the age of climate crisis. But we're now coming to the recognition that that understanding that we can control nature is not beneficial for long-term human survival. So we're going to have to shift into a new paradigm of understanding what it means to be a human living in the world where nature on a global scale is dangerous to our survival. Never before again have humans had to face this issue where we've created a situation where we can cause our own demise. So what this is going to have to result in is a fundamental reshaping of every aspect of human civilization. Once Mahatma Gandhi was coming to London, and he was asked by the British journalist, "What do you think of Western civilization?" And he smiled and he said, "I think it's a good idea." We are going to have to fundamentally rethink what it means to be a human civilization in an age of climate crisis. What does that look like? So our economies, a GDP-based economy, is that going to be the kind of level of happiness and growth and prosperity that's going to determine what it means to be in a developed country? We're going to have to look at our politics. Are our political structures today strong, not just strong enough, but is that structure able to confront climate change, right? Is democracy, and I'm not saying democracy is bad, but is democracy the model through which we can address climate change? At the moment, it doesn't look like it is. And I'm not advocating for another form of governance, but what I'm saying is that the current political structures are not set up to address an issue which is cross-border and long-term systematic threat to human society. So what politics do we need to have in order to address these major crises? And then with the technological advancements we're facing in the world, specifically automation and the fact that in the next 25 to 50 years, many people are going to lose their jobs through automation and technology, we're going to get to a place where we're going to have to rethink this fundamental question that Hinduism starts with, is what does it mean to be a human being? Not what is the value of human life, but what is the purpose of human life? And that's, I feel, is not just what the Hinduism brings, but that's what all of our traditions bring. And what all of our traditions have advocated for from day one is, what does it mean to be a human? Because the capitalist system takes away purpose from any spiritual sense and gives a material not a material value, but it says the purpose is to create economic growth. But economic growth is not going to be the model in the future, so we're going to have to find a new model, and I would propose that model is going to have to be based on what does it mean to be a human, to live in harmony with the natural world. So that's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to throw out that question. What does it mean to be a human? How are we going to live in this age of climate crisis, and what are the structures that we're going to have to create to deal with the crisis that we've created for ourselves?
Thank you, Gopal, for taking us through the Hindu thought on identity and challenging us to consider identities, to reflect on who we are and challenge our notions of what it means and what a human civilization should look like. Our final speaker today is Mark Hathaway. He's a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Waterloo who studies the interconnections between transformative learning, ecology, social justice, worldviews, spirituality, and wisdom. With Leonardo Boff, he is the author of The Tao of Liberation, Exploring the Ecology of Transformation, published by Orbis Books in 2009. Mark's doctoral thesis on cultivating ecology wisdom, based on in-depth interviews with 24 ecological educators and activists, was the recipient of the International Transformative Learning Association's Distinguished Dissertation Award. Mark teaches at the University of Toronto, LaSalle University in Costa Rica, and with the Earth Charter Initiative. Mark's current research examines the development of ecological wisdom in the practice of permaculture in North and South America. Mark, the floor is yours.
So hello to everyone. I'm going to see if the technology works. Let's see if I do this. Ah, yes, it works. That's good. Okay, so ecological wisdom. I'm not speaking from a particular faith tradition, even though I am going to make some links to faith traditions. I think what my presentation really relates a lot to the question that Gopal was just asking. What does it mean to be human? Like, what do we need to be as humans at this time of deep crisis? And, you know, if we're thinking about this time that we live in, obviously, we're kind of at a crossroads. And I like this slide because the crossroads isn't a very simple crossroads. I mean, it'd be nice to have clear pathways, but it's kind of like arriving at one of these intersections where you really don't know exactly where you're going to go. But the good news is, there's a good news here. We really actually know what we would need to do to move towards sustainability and even toward a more regenerative presence on this planet. I mean, we don't lack the technologies. We don't lack the knowledge. We even have a pretty good idea of what kinds of policies. Now, I actually should have changed that date there, but basically, you know, we could actually in 10 years lower our greenhouse gas emissions by 80%. It's not impossible. We know how to do that. We have the technologies, we have a good idea of the policies, we know that we have to, you know, go beyond GDP, have a different kind of economy. We know this. There's been great work done on this. we could solve most of our problems. The problem is we're not doing it, you know? And a lot of that, not only, we could go all day to analyze these questions, but part of this is a lack of wisdom, a lack of knowing how to orient ourselves and how should we be humans at this time. So, when we talk about wisdom, and I think this is something faith traditions, there's a lot of wisdom in faith traditions, in all the faith traditions, indigenous spiritual traditions, and all kinds of traditions. And we're really at a great moment in history because all of these wisdoms are actually available to us in a way, like, look at this parliament. There's a huge amount of potential happening here. But what do we mean when we talk about wisdom? Well, there's lots of ways to define this, and sometimes in a workshop I actually get people to think about a wise person and it's amazing, most of this stuff comes up. But just to kind of go, first off, wisdom isn't just knowledge. It's not abstract knowledge. It's heart knowledge, it's tacit knowledge, it's experiential knowledge. But it's also knowledge for the common good. When I say the common good, I mean the common good of all of creation, not just humans. A second kind of image we could think of from indigenous traditions in North America is the medicine wheel, which teaches us this idea with the directions of the mental, the emotional, the physical, and the spiritual. Wisdom is integral. It has all of these. It isn't just spiritual, it's not just mental, it's not just emotional, it's not just physical, it's all of these. It integrates them. So, there's an integral ecology of wisdom, we could say. The next is that it's related to compassion, generosity, and insight. No matter how brilliant someone is, we wouldn't say that they're wise if they weren't compassionate, right? If they weren't generous. It also, and this is a really important one for us right now, humility. It knows limits, balance. It's not just about learning, it's about unlearning, right? There's a lot of things right now we need to unlearn, a lot of habits of being that we have to let go of. And, there's a lot of things in spiritual traditions about that, about how we can do that. Now, I really like this, Dudley Patterson, who's an Inde elder, used this idea of the smoothness of mind. Wisdom has smoothness of mind. It's able to deal with complexity and kind of maintain a certain amount of calm in the midst of crisis, and we really need this right now. When you think of kind of the kind of political discourses going out there and the kind of craziness that we're facing, we need to calmly and peacefully work through these things. The other thing about wisdom is that it sees wider patterns. It's about patterns. And one of the ways to understand, for instance, the Tao, in terms of Taoism, is as patterning. Like, the universe is full of patterns. More than matter, it's about patterns. And the patterns that we find in nature. And I think that also relates to the idea of Dharma. It also relates to a word that most Christians don't know, strangely enough, which is Malkuta, which is the word that gets translated from Aramaic as the reign or the kingdom. But it has a bit of the same idea within it. So wisdom helps us to see larger patterns, to intuit. And it's also geared toward action. If you don't put it in practice, it isn't wise. It's about trying to live well. In Latin America, they talk about buen vivir, summa causai, about flourishing. It's not just surviving. It's about how can we flourish on this planet with all the other beings? How can all the beings on this planet really flourish? So when we talk about ecological wisdom, I often like to draw on the theologian Raimon Panikkar, who also was very influenced by Hinduism. And it's a Christian theologian, kind of had a foot in both the Hindu and the Christian world. And he affirms that ecological wisdom is not simply wisdom about the earth. Rather, it denotes a subjective genitive. It's the wisdom of earth herself which discloses unto us once we are open to understand it and stand under the spell of what she is revealing to us. So we need to learn how to be guided by earth's wisdom. And I would agree with a lot of the speakers that, it's not a matter of waiting for God to intervene with a miracle. The thing is, the miracle's already here. The miracle's already here, but we're not seeing it. What we need to learn is how to work with all the other creatures of this earth as allies. We cannot save the earth as humans. I know we've kind of gotten ourselves into the mess, but we can't get out of it by ourselves. We need to learn to work with all the community of life. And for this, I really love this from Rainer Maria Rilke, who says, if we surrender to Earth's intelligence, and I would say to Earth's wisdom, we could rise up rooted like trees. Instead, we entangle ourselves in knots of our own making and struggle lonely and confused. Why do we feel lonely and confused? Part of that is our disconnection from the more than human world, from the greater Earth community. So, this kind of ecological wisdom is important, but how do we actually find it? How do we cultivate it? So when I say ecological wisdom, I mean, ideally, all wisdom, we wouldn't even need to say ecological, because all wisdom should be ecological wisdom. But I think it makes the point that it isn't just human wisdom. It's the wisdom of the home, the oikos. It's a relational wisdom. Ecology has to do with relationships, and wisdom has to do with relationships. How do we relate to each other as humans? How do we relate to the entire more than human world? So I spent quite a few years doing a study on this. I interviewed 24 ecological educators and activists, and also looked at 6 or 7 biographical exemplars, looking at their significant life experiences, like how did they actually develop ecological wisdom in their lives, and how did they understand it? And most of them were from North America. I was particularly interested in how people kind of stuck in this kind of Western worldview, this mechanistic worldview, actually managed to work their way out of it. And so I thought it was important to look at that. But actually there were people who were originally from India, Brazil, Ireland, Bolivia, Austria, Hungary, the UK. So it was so it was actually wider than North America, but probably more focused on that. And I was thinking today about the faith traditions. Some were Christian, Jewish, Sufi, pagan, indigenous, Buddhist, Hindu, and others with earth-based spirituality. So it was really, pretty wide, the number of different spiritualities. And some of them are well known. I interviewed Vandana Shiva, Matthew Fox, both of whom are at this conference. Fritjof Capra, a very well-known physicist. Starhawk, very well-known pagan leader. And some of the biographical sources were David Suzuki, Arnie Nass, the founder of Deep Ecology, very influenced by Gandhi, by the way, Arnie Nass, and indigenous spiritualities. Joanna Macy, who's Tibetan Buddhist, whose first career, by the way, was as a CIA agent, just an interesting little fact. So change is always possible. Now very important ecological activists, Rachel Carson, Aldo Leopold, Julia Butterfly-Pill. So, ecological wisdom. What is this? Well, wisdom is about action, but it's a process. And I draw here on something that John Grimm, another person I actually interviewed who's also at this conference, talked about he talks about sensing, minding, creating. And actually this is a good model for wisdom. It's about how we perceive the world, how we in mind it. Now that's kind of a strange word. How we attune to the more than human world, empathize with, enter into intersubjective relation. How do we form the relationship? And then how do we co-create and act together? So in terms of the experiences, some of the things I found. In terms of the sensing side, now that's Julia Butterfly-Hill, by the way, in the background. She spent about 2 years in a redwood tree, so she's an interesting person to look at. But in terms of the sensing, the sense of interconnection with other beings, a wider perception of self, which once again Arnie Nass talked a lot about, drawing on Hindu thought. But it's an intersubjective or interwovenness rather than a fusion with. It's a sense of almost being entwined with the other. It's also, and from this arrives a spontaneous internalized ethic. It's not a matter of should, it's a matter of care that arises from a sense of compassion and connection. It involves new forms of perception, a more empathic, more embodied way of perceiving, an expanded sense of time and space, so connection to the ancestors, to the future beings, a sense of going beyond, being rooted in place, but at the same time being conscious of wider implications. In terms of the minding, recovering a sense of the sacred in all, almost everyone spoke about the sense of the sacred in all of creation. A deep sense of respect and care, yes, but I think, it's not just a matter of respect. It's a matter of care. It's a sense of almost the miraculousness of creation that really motivates us to say, I can, and to do something. Attuning oneself to the other, learning from, communicating with other beings, be they human or other than human. Enacting, working in harmony with, co-creating with other beings. I mean, I think there's some interesting models for this. One of the reasons I'm studying permaculture, that I think it's one of the ways of trying to understand how can we co-create with, work with nature rather than against it. And discerning actions appropriate to specific contexts. So that's really part of the art of wisdom. So now we get to this very complex diagram, which if you like the academic stuff, you can have it. You can if you don't like ontology, epistemology, praxeology, and axiology, that's fine. That's for the academic. But it's really about sensing, minding, enacting, creating, valuing, and finding meaning. And there's all kinds of stuff in this diagram. I could probably spend half an hour on it, but certainly in the ontology, something more relational, a sense of the sacredness, this really experiencing the sense of connection with. In terms of the minding, learning to learn from the other, being permeated by, entwined by, communicating with. In terms of practice, kind of a harmonious action. In Taoism, they talk about wu-wei, it's kind of like working with an attunement, a sense of the whole applied to specific contexts. In terms of values, the sense of a value of care that arises from intrinsic value. There's a lot there. In terms of how this actually comes about, once again, another diagram we could spend a half an hour on, which I won't. But there's this process of sensing, kind of shifting and minding, and then enacting. And this kind of follows, if any of you have seen Otto Schwarmer's Theory U, this is modeled a bit on that. But I don't see it as kind of a rigid process. I mean, actually, all these things happen in all different orders. I mean, they all happen in our lives. But in terms of the sensing, opening and attending to, also grieving and letting go is part of that, honoring the pain for the world. Imagining and creating, so artistic practice. Reconnecting and entwining with, so really learning to communicate with other beings. Immersing and crossing over had to do with people senses of alterity, where they enter another ecosystem, another culture, learning from, being drawn beyond your own worldview. And then care, respect, protect. Reflecting and analyzing also plays a role in this. Interacting and co-creating, and then moving into more the practice in story and share. A lot of what's really important, which I can't really do in this time, are the wonderful stories. I think it's sharing stories about our wonder of creation, and it'd be wonderful to share faith stories about that as well. That's where it really comes together. We really need to in-story this. I can show you the theory today. I can't share all the stories, and I'm sorry for that, because I think stories are really rich. And I think in faith community, that's something we can really do well. And also organize and empower to move forward. Now, I want to look at two kind of applications to this that I think relate to faith traditions. And the first one I'm going to look at is Buddhism. Now, I just want to spend a moment and apologize for this. I don't want to malign snakes here. I actually like snakes quite a bit. But, trying to think of an image for the three poisons, I just couldn't think of a better one. So, nothing against snakes here. So the three poisons in Buddhism talk about the three poisons. And in Buddhism, there's a lot of concern about dukkha, which is suffering, but it's also stress, pain, anxiety. There's a lot of that right now in the world, right? There's a lot of that. So this is like a lot of what impedes wisdom. The three poisons are what impedes wisdom. And the first of these poisons that cause us to disconnect from other beings, from the sense of that sacred, is aversion. So hatred, fear, compulsive avoidance. So there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of scapegoating going on right now. And it's being fed, right? It's like anti-wisdom being shoved down our throats. But also fear around climate change. If we try to motivate people through fear, we need to know the facts. But to motivate through fear can actually have the opposite the opposite effect of what we really want. So let's think about how we try to motivate people. The other big one in our society is addiction. And we know there's all kinds of addictions. There's an opioid crisis, there's alcoholism, but the biggest one of all is consumerism. And the capitalist system actually feeds on that. It tries to entice us with that. And in our spiritual traditions, we all have things that speak about, about moderation, needs versus wants and things like that. Like, it's something that we really need to pick up on. And the final one I'd like to speak of is the delusion of separation, which can also happen in despair. It actually breeds despair. I mean, one of the reasons why we feel powerlessness, I think, in the face of the ecological crisis, obviously it's a big thing. But part of that is that, once again, we think as humans we have to solve it alone. And we can't. We need to draw on the wisdom of all the other beings and work with them. So one kind of Buddhist, at least somewhat inspired by Buddhism, practices the work that reconnects. And I've done a lot of work with this at Joanna Macy, one of the exemplars I mentioned. She really draws on both Tibetan Buddhism and deep ecology in particular. And what she says, and this insight I think comes out of Buddhism, is that we need to begin in a place of gratitude. And I extend that to all wonder and beauty. We need to work on the emotions that help us feel connected to the more than human world. The ones that kind of inspire in us a sense of awe and possibility and the miraculousness of nature, really. The miraculousness of this creation we live in. And if we start from that place, rather than fear, we can do a lot more. But we do need to also, honor our pain for the world. And why this crisis is so painful is because we are connected, right? I mean, we are connected. And that also, though, is the source of our power. And what Joanna says, we have to kind of work through that, honor that pain, work through it, and realize that it's the source of our deeper connection, to see with new eyes, to perceive the world in a new way, develop that deeper sense of time, that through systems theory and other things, a sense of interconnectedness, and go forth into action. And as Thich Nhat Hanh says, we're here to awaken from the illusion of our separateness. I think that's really key in terms of being able to confront the ecological crisis. Just one more example, and I'll wrap up. The other one, this one isn't going to be maybe so well known to people. The Beatitudes in Christianity is really well known, but the Aramaic version sometimes reveals some interesting things. So I'm drawing here on the work of Neil Douglas Klotz. So the first thing about the Beatitudes, I think this is like therapy for activists, by the way. It's like spiritual path for activists. We need this. So the first thing, when it talks about blessed are the poor, blessed is to be fruitful, to be healed, to be aligned with the one, to be connected, really. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing it says, blessed are the poor in spirit, is about, when you have nothing left to hold on to, go back to the breath. And think about breath. This is in almost all our traditions, the sacredness of breath. Breath connects us to each other and to all of life, right? And breath has a power. We need to reconnect to that. The second, blessed are the mourners, we need to lament. But also there's an image here of longing deeply for another world. We need to long deeply. We need to long deeply and at the same time lament what's happening. The third one about humility is about softening what is rigid within. It's kind of opening ourselves to the healing power of the earth so it can flow through us. That's what humility is. Humility is that sense of letting go, of softening, and reconnecting. Then the one about justice has an image of all the voices coming together around a table. All the different voices. Not just the human voices, I would say. Sometimes it's inner and outer, but I'd also say, what about the other than human voices? Can we learn to listen to them? Can we learn to work with them? There's a part about being compassionate. Compassion comes from the Racham. The Racham is the womb. It's giving birth. It's giving birth to mercy and compassion and care. So this ethic of care. Then, the purity of heart has to be working from the center, from the passion that allows us to see the unity and interconnection of all. In terms of the peacemakers, it's planting peace each season. We have to keep doing this over the long haul, planting peace each season. And finally, the part about persecution also talks about experiencing the abundance of the cosmos. We need to experience that and root ourselves in it. So to conclude, I'm just going to take a quote from Thomas Berry, who says, we're not lacking in the dynamic forces needed to create the future. We live immersed in a sea of energy beyond all comprehension. But this energy in an ultimate sense is ours not by domination, but by invocation. So if we can soften ourselves, if we can open ourselves and attune ourselves to that wisdom that's available all around us, the wisdom of the divine that's present in all of creation, and learn to work with it and work concretely, this isn't just, it's an embodied spirituality, I think incredible things are possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for that presentation. Taking a more holistic approach to wisdom, going far beyond just rational thought, and presenting different spiritual perspectives on how to achieve that wisdom or not get distracted from it. So we have about 20 minutes left, and so that there's plenty of time for questions. So there's microphones around. I think this one's closest to most people. So if y'all have questions, particularly if they're directed towards one panelist, I figure we can take three.
Nick, could I just say one thing before
Sure.
we do that? Can you hear me if I do this? Okay. This is my first time here, so I didn't really know quite what to expect. And having listened to the other panelists, I realize I should probably explain, for what it's worth, Christianity is an eschatological religion, meaning that God's act of creation is an unfolding in time, does not exist in its fullness yet, is anticipated in its fullness, has been promised to us in its fullness, but its fullness will only come at the end of time. Also, in that regard, in this unfolding story of God's purposes in bringing about creation, however you want to phrase it, there is human freedom at work, which is part of the divine intention, but it has sin also enters in and opposes God's purposes. So that you get the story being mixed up a bit. And that's where apocalyptic, which is not exactly the same thing as eschatology, but apocalyptic would add to that, saying that this power of human sin looks like it's going to be triumphant. It's going to bring everything to a collapse. And so when I said I felt sort of apocalyptic about climate change, the idea is that human sin, as manifest through what we're doing to the environment, looks like it's going to win out. Or can we actually do the things that the panelists were talking about in order to draw the story of creation back along the lines of God's purposes? And with righteousness, with holiness of life, with a contemplative freedom that allows us. But anyway, because I realized I didn't really explain that sense of the Christian understanding of creation as a divine act, but yet as oriented toward the future. Okay, sorry about that.
Thank you, Father Douglas. Comment on that is just piggybacking off that from the Christian perspective as well, that that idea of sin, in Greek, the word sin comes from amartia, which literally means missing the mark. So there is this correct way it's supposed to be, and yet when we make a mistake in our fallen nature as humans, we have that free will to choose, and we sometimes choose wrong and harm our relationship with Earth. So we'll open the floor. I figure we can take 2 or 3 questions. The panelists can respond. Then we probably have time for about 2 or 3 more after that, and then everyone will have a chance to sort of wrap up wrap up their remarks. And if there aren't any questions or anything like that, we can always end early as well. So we'll open the floor.
I don't really have a question, but you talked about somebody who lived in a tree.
Yes.
I'm intrigued by that.
So Julia Butterfly Hill is one of the biographical sources I take. I mean, she's still alive, but I mean, I based it on her biography. She basically spent nearly 2 years in a redwood in California that they were trying to fell. And she even named the tree Luna, and she lived up in a platform in the tree. She didn't come down for almost 2 years, and she saved the tree. But it was an amazing experience insofar it wasn't easy by any means. She was up there in storms and you can imagine, but also loggers around her. She witnessed, a fellow protester be killed by a falling tree during that time. But she also developed an incredible connection with the tree. I mean, she almost came to the point to where she almost felt like a bit like a part of the tree. She talked about, her feet would be dyed by the tannin in the bark of the redwood, and that would allow her to grip the tree better, and she would climb up to the crown. It's amazing. Anyhow, you can look up her biography, but it's actually quite an amazing biography. I highly recommend it.
Okay. There we are. Thanks for all of your presentations. And as a kid and right into my teens, I used to live in the cherry tree. Practically, I was the oldest of 6 kids, and it was the only way to get away from all my siblings. But I spent so many days and hours up in that cherry tree, so I appreciate that she did it solidly for 2 years. That's amazing. One of the things that I would like to hear a little bit more about is well, you mentioned it, Mark, what is it that propels someone into a different way of understanding? In Christianity, we might call it a conversion experience, or an infusion of the Holy Spirit that kind of jolts somebody into a different perspective of who they are as creature, I guess, as living almost in a different understanding of reality, what is real, what is real. And so as you were investigating people's stories, what kind of drivers were there that would lead to or would spark some kind of real conversion experience to a new understanding?
Okay, I mean,
Anyone.
there were actually lots of things. I mean, early childhood experiences of nature often were mentioned, which is kind of the classic one that Louise Chawla talks about as well. But some of them, that came quite a bit later in life. It didn't always come as childhood. So experiences of places. Spiritual practices were important there were all kinds of spiritual practices: Tai Chi, loving kindness, meditation, more like embodied, I would say, ceremonial practices that some people had, maybe more meditative practices. There was a big artistic practices, that help people to focus in another way. And then the thing is that there's both kinds of slow accretional learning, and then there's the breakthroughs. And they're actually interrelated. If you understand systems theory, it's like, if you understand in neurophysiology, our brains have neuronal connections, and we form those pretty early, and we get into habits of mind. And the 2 ways to change a habit of mind are through attention and practice. And attention can be extended through imagination. But the moment of the shift is often what we focus on. It's kind of like the epiphany. And often the breakthrough experience, but often there's been a long build-up to that. So just to say that, it's not a matter of just looking at the moment of the epiphany. But some of the epiphanies came from being in a very different place and kind of seeing things for the first time. A few people talked about psychedelic experience. Wasn't something I was looking for, but quite a few actually did mention that. Others, cross-cultural experience. Sometimes it was like And there's one person who was just doing the road to Santiago and for days and days had been laboring and was tired and just kind of suddenly broke into another awareness. Like it just happened spontaneously. So all kinds of different things, really. But I'll let the others also, if there's anything that you have to say to that.
Yeah, I'm always willing to say something. Looking at it from a Carmelite perspective, yeah, in this case it would be, I mean, there's all the other influences, everything that Mark mentioned. But specifically, Carmelite spirituality allows that to be focused within the Christian context, of course. Be focused toward the decision to try and maintain a prayer life. So there's that fundamental decision that I want to live in an interior relationship to God, and I want to do that through the regular practice of interior prayer. And of course that brings all these other things into relation to this fundamental act of will. So you're practicing prayer, and it's sort of like Mark was saying, you practice recollection, you grow in that, you acquire some facility for inner peace, and then you have an epiphany moment that comes of that. We Carmelites call that contemplation. It's almost like the act of trying to love God becomes my surrender to God loving me. And then at that point, your mind opens, you begin to change, you see things in very different ways. Now, it doesn't happen out of the blue, otherwise it would be a hallucination or something. But it is a very powerful spiritual experience that then continues in life, not perhaps with the same power, but that is the idea, that your attitudes, your vision of everything begins to change, because you realize fundamentally that what it's all about is love, and it's not my love, but this cosmic, transcendent love that has hold of everything, unconditionally so, and you live in a new world. Okay. Sorry.
Well, just to add a Zoroastrian perspective to it, Zoroastrianism promotes the idea that you somehow communicate with the divine certainly through your prayers, and he communicates with you through your mind. Meditation is of importance. So when you do meditate, that lets your mind free of the usual thoughts, usual pressures, and that's when you get a realization of change, of different ways of doing things, of a certain release that allows the new things to come in, and new perspective to be brought to you, if that's of any help. Yeah.
I can just share quickly from the Hindu context. Specifically within the bhakti traditions of Hinduism, there's this, just as mentioned earlier, you know, the goal is deep loving relationship with God and all of his creation or her creation. But that deep loving relationship is difficult to attain. It doesn't happen overnight. And so it said that there's a practice, like a single focus practice. You know, the bhakti tradition calls it sadhana. You know, single-minded focus on that practice. It's almost fake it till you make it, you know. Just do it, you know, and at some point, just by doing the act regularly with that focus, it becomes automatic. And when it becomes automatic, it turns from sadhana, turns from practice to raganuga. It becomes spontaneous. So you're no longer doing the activity because someone's telling you or you think it's the right thing to do. You're doing it because it just becomes part of you, and that becomes then your new identity of just that loving relationship. But that could be with environmental issues as well. You know, keep forcing oneself to recycle. Eventually, it just becomes part of your identity, and you're going to automatically recycle with even having to think about it as well.
I'll just add one thing to that as well, from because there's the, sort of the mystical, I think, experience, but there's also, from what I find with a lot of our people and especially our youth, is just experiences. So when they go on mission trips or even within the United States, go on and live in the wilderness for a few weeks or whatever, they have that experience with nature that allows them to come back and start to question and think and act differently, live differently, and all of that. So anyway, you have a question?
Speakers, because from what you said, it has encouraged me to think deeper into the environment question. Now, the first three speakers spoke more from this point of spirituality, and the last speaker spoke more on the point of wisdom. Is spirituality and wisdom twins? Are they two separate paths, or are they one path? That's where I'm confused. What would you say?
Well, perhaps I will attempt to answer that. I guess both are important. The spiritual path, we are given wisdom through our spiritual masters. They have given us the wisdom, and that wisdom has been developed over a number of years. It has been refined. We have that wisdom. Now, the important part is to act on it. We have the wisdom. If we don't act on it, that wisdom is futile. So the important part now, I mean, we know that we have all this wisdom. We know that we have a problem. We know the answer to those problems. As Mark pointed out, we know that. We know how to fix it. It's just that we need the will to fix it. We need to act. And that part of acting, is something that will come only if we as a species somehow combine our efforts and come up with one plan, a simple plan, but one plan that everybody would follow, and then that plan will get us through. Because the way we are right now, we are just in our own, yes, religions say that things are important, but we still keep on going the way we are. That's not the answer.
To respond to your question, spirituality from the perspective of Christian and more specifically a Carmelite understanding. Spirituality has to do with life in the Spirit. For a Christian, that would be the Holy Spirit or the divine breath, if you will. Spirit being breath. So the divine breath. Now, of course, human beings have a spirit too, although in most of us it's rather stunted. But there is this aspect of human being that is spirit, and so therefore spirituality has to do with aligning the divine spirit with the human spirit. And of course, it's not limited to the individual. You have like a corporate spirit of a society like the United States. The corporate spirit is pretty messed up, you know. And so it has to do with aligning those so that this divine process of creation can go forward. Now, within that, when an individual, or you could say probably with a group like the family of Carmel, insofar as there is this alignment, there is born in us a divine wisdom, or the wisdom, very much like what Mark was saying. It's a wonderful description. This sense of being part of something larger than ourselves, etc. I won't reduplicate Mark. But so that spirituality, wisdom, from a Christian perspective, wisdom is sort of part of spirituality. It's listed as one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit. So it has to do with the kind of persons we become when we live in harmony like that with the divine spirit.
They are not twins, as you mentioned, but I think they're intertwined.
Yeah, that was going to be my answer. So from the,
Sorry.
that's okay.
We are the band.
Yeah, please join us. From the Hindu perspective, so wisdom comes from many sources. From a Hindu perspective, wisdom comes from above, from the divine. wisdom comes from within, and wisdom comes from the earth as well. So it comes from 3 places. And how one kind of attracts that wisdom or receives that wisdom is through the practice of spirituality. So as one becomes more aligned with the divine, with themselves, and with the earth, they're more aligned and more receptive to the wisdom that is emanating from these 3 different sources. So I would say they're interconnected, you know. The more one becomes more spiritually practiced, the more one becomes more spiritually advanced in their practice, the more wisdom one can receive. So they kind of interchange like that, yeah.
And I would also go back to that image of the medicine wheel that I talked about. If you looked at in that spirituality was one of the 4. There's a mental, spiritual, physical, and emotional, and actually they all entwine. I mean, we use these 4 different names for things, but in practice they entwine in us, right? And I think for me the spirituality part particularly would have to do with that, the first part of the sensing or the perceiving, the opening, the attention, that allows us to open ourselves and entwine with another. So, and that's why I don't think it's coincidence that so many spiritual practices have to do with the breath, because the original meaning is spirit and breath in many languages around the world are the same. So.
So we have about 2 minutes left. So if everyone wants to give 30 seconds, if you have something, just anything you feel like you wanted to add or finalize, and then that'll be it.
Go for it.
Me? No.
Start from
I've said enough already. You take it.
Well, all I have to say is I feel passionately that our faiths have given us the tools to do things. If we don't do things for the environment, for the creations of God, then we will be failing. And I think it's time to act. That's what we are missing. It's the action. Thank you.
Yeah, just to echo that as well, I mean, as I mentioned in my remarks, the climate crisis has started. And we are actually too late to avert a lot of the effects of climate change for the long term. So I think we have to become very realistic about where we are, the lack of capacity human civilization has to address this issue, the willingness, the moral kind of leadership that we need. So I think we need to be realistic about where we are, what we can achieve, what we can't achieve, and prepare ourselves for what's coming. And that is through action. I think that's really important.
Just to add to that a moment, in what I had to say in my remarks, since this is already happening and it's going to unfold, we can mitigate it, etc. But it's unfolding already. And you see the effects of this also socially in the rise of fascist movements around the world, etc. And the effect this is going to have on the poor. And the danger, I feel, is going to tear us apart, one against another. And so faith traditions have a really important part to play in holding us together as a human family.
And I would say we need to move even beyond a vision of sustainable development to what I would call regenerative liberation. And I'm thinking of the Jewish expression of tikkun olam, of repairing the world. That's our task for now. But we don't need to do it alone. We're going to do it. We're only going to do it if we learn how to work with the entire biotic community to do that. And even drawing carbon out of the atmosphere, there is a way to do it in soil. It takes time. We can't do it. Fungi, plants, they can do it. We can't do it. But in a sense, nature has already invented a lot of the technologies we need. We just have to work with them, not imposing ourselves on them.
Thank you. We'll just give one last round of applause for our esteemed panelists.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming. Have a great rest of your Parliament.